Welcome. This is our second of a six-part series on learning how to uh, increasing our knowledge around the alternative energy sector. So welcome if you've been part of our series last week, and welcome if you're just new to our series. I'd like to take this time to thank our sponsors, the province of Alberta and the Government of Canada. They provide employment support for both services and programs. If you'd like to learn more about all of the services provided, I just Google Employment Training Directory, Alberta, and it will show up. Now, we have prepared a few questions beforehand, and so we will be asking those questions first, and then we would like you to participate by sharing your questions. You'll see on your screen there's a little box, type your question there, it's as easy as that. Now, I do want to apologize if we don't get to your question, if we run out of time, or if we have too many questions. It's not a reflection on the question, it'll just be a reflection on our time constraints. But I do want to remind you that I can't see you or I can't hear you. And so the only way to communicate is through that typing in your little question, and we will respond. So last week we had a draw for a $50 gift prize, and we haven't heard back from the person who won. So please check your junk mail just in case you were the winner and you haven't received your notification yet. We are going to do a poll at the end of this session with a question that we will have answered at some point during our conversations, and we'd ask you to put in the correct answer. Hopefully it's the correct answer, your name and also your email, and we will be getting in touch with you at the end of this series session today. Goodness me, I'm hoping our technology gods are looking after us today. So prior to our live session, we've had a PowerPoint running, which shares information about upcoming events, etc., for Talent Pool, but also the bios of our panelists are on that with information about their organizations. So hopefully you will have had a chance to gather that information beforehand, or you will be able to watch it again at the end of this series. We will have it rolling again. Our suggestion is if you'd like to get in touch with any of the presenters today, that you actually go to their LinkedIn bio and connect. And once again, I want to say, please don't push just the connect button, but actually type in where you heard them, how you know of them, or what you would like to discuss with them. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel. All of them are entrepreneurs and all of them are innovative. And I think last week, what I came away from was those are two skills that we all need to demonstrate as we move into this whole new energy sector. And so it's my pleasure to introduce our first guest. Our first guest is Dr. Lazell, and he is with the University of Calgary. His career has been focused on how we can transform our energy systems for a more sustainable low-carbon economy. His academic research program is the modeling of future energy scenarios based on a detailed understanding of the costs, benefits, and trade-offs of energy systems technologies, from recovery of energy resources through to the delivery of energy services. I've seen a few of his interviews and papers, and I'll confess, I don't really understand the technical information, but Dr. Lazell argues that incremental change will not be enough to meet Canada's aggressive reduction targets. Climate policy needs a fresh approach, which I agree with, and I think his work is leading the way. So I'm looking forward to our discussion this morning, Dr. Lazell. Thank you for being here. Our next panelist is Sean Wagner. And he is leveraging years of research experience to help explain complicated concepts in easy to understand ways. Sean is a gifted writer, and as you read through the Alberta Nuclear Nucleus website, that's a mouthful, it is as if he's having a conversation with you. He does make technical information easy to understand. His LinkedIn profile states he is trying to advocate for and educate about nuclear energy and how it can benefit all people in Alberta and beyond. I think he needs to delete the word trying because as I read through the website, he's doing a great job. By the way, there's also a great video about Bob Kramer, who makes the finest chef knives in the world. Check out the blog to see how it ties into the energy theme. I think that's Sean's gift, being able to tie into different ideas and bring them all together. Thank you, Sean, and I look forward to our discussion.
Me too.
Jeff Reading. Jeff Reading is our last panelist, and he has a background in education, government leadership, not-for-profit management, clean tech commercialization, carbon management, and climate change mitigation and adaptation. Whew. I crept his LinkedIn profile, and we actually have 71 connections. And this is what some people said about him. Jeff is a visionary, strategic thinker, yet excels at action-based solutions. He is the best group facilitator, and his talent for connecting people and building consensus is second to none. Jeff is a visionary leader who operates very strategically, both at the policy and the operational level. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us. Okay, let's get this show on the road. We are so lucky to have such expertise with us today. And I think we're going to start with a big question, which is clean tech is a multi-billion-dollar economy and growing quickly. What skills and talents are required to connect with this growth, and how do I reinvent myself in that space? So perhaps we'll start at the bottom screen with Jeff, as this was your question.
Thanks, Jen, and morning, David. Morning, Sean. Great to see the climates here, and I'm in distinguished company, so feel honored to be here, and look forward to the discussion, and great to see so many people dialed in. So this is a big question, and lots of opportunity, I think, to reinvent ourselves as we look at where we're going around a transformational or certainly a disruptive approach to energy going forward. So some of the sort of characteristics I think we need to be thinking more about are being creative and problem solver approach to things. So being tenacious and thoughtful about where we're going, and not just thinking about things in simple terms, really transformational kind of ways of looking at things. Commitment and follow through. This is not an easy thing, some of this transition we're going through. So it really is, it requires some commitment, some dedication, some tenacity to get things done. A good evidence-based and well-validated approach to the solutions that we put together has to be there as well. So this has to be customer-based, market-centered, future-proof oriented, all those sorts of things. I think on a personal level, we need to know how to better sell ourselves, if you want to call it that, while being humble in doing that. And looking at resumes from people now, it's almost like, 10 years ago, if you had jobs in 5 or 6 different companies, you were seen as unstable. Now, if you don't have a resume that has jobs in 5 or 6 places, they're not interested because there's not enough diversity and variety in your background. So the whole way of how you sell yourself and present yourself is changing. My dad used to say, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should listen twice as much as you speak. So that's certainly the case here. Being nimble and fast and responsive and listening to all the different things that are going on out there is important. And learn about company building. In this day and age, being an entrepreneur is a great way to go. It's not for everyone, but it is a great way to go. But learning how companies are built, reading about that, connecting and doing that sort of thing, and being a lifelong learner in that capacity, all we're thinking about. As David mentioned, it's not about being, or in his intro, Lynn mentioned that David thinks it's not about being incremental, and that's certainly where it's at. We can't be nibbling around the edges here. We really have to look at future-proof solutions. So as you invent yourself or retrain yourself or look at how you reapply yourselves, What are those future-proof solutions? Where are we going to be in 8 or 10 years? And how do you retrain or recalibrate or position you to be relevant in that space? Networking is probably more important than ever. I'd say it's not who you know, it's not what you know, it's who you know now more than ever. And making sure you expand those groups and developing a really good ability to ask questions, thoughtful, open-ended, engaging, what I call fierce questions, because some of the questions are hard. So we want to make sure that we focus on those difficult questions as we reinvent ourselves and volunteer. Get out there and spend some time in these different organizations, whether they're startup companies or industry associations or groups like ACTIA, the Alberta Clean Tech Industry Alliance, or whatever. There's lots of them out there. So get there and volunteer and have a global focus. I think a lot of the challenge that we have in the entrepreneurial world in Alberta is we're great at developing solutions, not so good at putting them in the market because we think the market might be here. Not always true. So there's lots of opportunity to reinvent ourselves as we look at these sorts of things. So anyway, there's a few things off the top for that.
Thank you very much. David, what do you have to add to that list?
Well, it's an incredible list, Jeff. That's wonderful. I think it's terrific. I'm not going to, it's hard to follow such a comprehensive analysis, and I appreciate that. I think certainly that understand that the future of Alberta and the future of Canada, the future of our energy systems aren't necessarily an extension of the past. But, the future, the future isn't set, that we have a chance to create the future, and especially in Alberta. Right now, the economy of this province has been built on making fuels and selling fuels into the world, and but they're now actually we seem to the fuels that the whole world is trying to stop using, gasoline and diesel and natural gas. But we still have this incredible energy resource in this province, not only our fossil fuel resources, but our renewable resources. And there is an opportunity to take those resources and make the zero emission fuels that the whole world is looking for and trying to get to. And we just have to leave the carbon in the ground and in the fossil fuels, but we also have to understand how to tap in other resources like our renewable resources and our nuclear resources to take us into the direction that we need to go. And I think that we have the skills and capability and the resources in this province. We just need to think about it more creatively. When you talk about oil and gas, we should not immediately think about, gasoline and diesel and natural gas in the way we use it today. We have to think about how we can use those resources in a different way. And so that's really, it's taken all of the other things that Jeff was talking about networking, about lifelong learning, about listening and thinking about new ways of new energy systems. I think is an incredible opportunity, and it's something that's going to be really important in moving forward.
Thank you. Sean, what are your thoughts?
I get to find the last few comments that might actually fit into this after getting completely covered by Jeff and David here. But the thing that I would like to say is kind of something that a lot of people might miss in the idea of when they're talking about reinventing themselves for the energy industry, is that the energy industry is what all of our other industries are based off of. We can't do anything without energy. So it doesn't really mean anything to say, how do I reinvent myself for the energy industry? Because when you're asking about what you can do in the energy industry, you're really asking, what can I do for literally everything that we do in society? So it's not just thinking about, am I going to go work on an oil rig, or am I going to be a linesman, or am I going to be an accountant who runs a company who does oil well prospecting or something like that. Basically, anything you can do in the energy industry will work and kind of propagate through the rest of the industries that you want. If we're talking about, the idea that oil and gas is on the way out as a fuel source for future energy systems, then the thought is not that, we're just going to be leaving the carbon in the ground. The thought is then, well, we have all of this technology and infrastructure that's built for pulling carbon out. what can we use it for that isn't a fuel? And there's lots of opportunities there. Like there's plastics, there's foams that you can use for structural things. A lot of homes are becoming more and more insulated with foams rather than standard glass fibers. So you're seeing sort of a shift in that industry there as the carbon sources become cheaper, as we stop using them for fuels. So that actually kind of changes how the whole system is working there. But then you've got that coming in terms of like green energy mandates for home insulation and whatnot. So it's a kind of interesting self-referential circle of the industry there, that as one thing kind of changes where its money source is coming from as it's getting extracted and moves to someplace else, it's still kind of connected to the whole energy system as we're working from different angles. So it's not just the energy system, it's everywhere if you really kind of think about it hard enough. So it's not, you don't want to try and like pigeonhole yourself thinking about how do I reinvent myself for the energy system. It's how can I work in society that is changing its energy system.
Can I jump in on
point well taken. Yes.
Can I jump in there, Lynn, on Sean's comment?
Please,
Because
please.
I think that's an excellent point. Is that don't limit yourself as you're starting to rethink about what you might be reinventing. It's not just about now. The interest in a low carbon economy globally and not just locally. The interest in being more carbon competitive within that carbon constrained world doesn't just pertain to the energy sector. It pertains to every single consumption choice that you make. So when you look forward, how do you stay relevant as a company in 8 or 10 years in a future-proof, constrained carbon world kind of thing? Those are all opportunities to be thinking about how you reinvent yourself as we diversify, as we think about different ways that we procure and use energy, and as we think more generally about the challenge that climate change represents, right? Climate change in my world is the ultimate challenge of the commons. Everything that we do revolves around that. So the opportunities, not just in the energy sector, are significant.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you. So much great information. And in fact, you might even have answered the next question we have, which is, as the traditional fossil fuel industry moves to engage to a low carbon economy and become more carbon competitive, what are the challenges and opportunities to explore there? So who might like to tackle that first?
I could throw out some ideas if you like. I
Thank you,
think
Dave.
one of the things we have some incredible opportunities in we have an incredible resource base. We've got the human resource that we have. We know people know how to drill holes. We know we have a lot of superb engineers in this province. We've also got a lot of existing infrastructure. So part of it is maybe thinking about how we piggyback on existing infrastructure to take us into a low carbon direction. I think Sean mentioned some of that possibility. We certainly understand chemical conversions in this province and the basic science and engineering of how to take something and make it into something else. And in the process of doing that, we can say, well, how can we do that in a way that will take us in creating the fuels that the whole world's looking for? And we know from studies looking, some of the work that we've been doing in the Transition Accelerator is recognizing that Canada is one of the lowest cost places in the world to make things like hydrogen and other sort of intermediates. So we have got an advantage and a global advantage. We got uranium coming out, or more uranium than we could ever use in Canada is in this country, and so we've got incredible resources, and we've got some pretty darn good wind resources, etc. That are worth that. So think about what we have, and think about how it's going to take us in a direction that will lead to where the world wants to go.
Thank you. Excellent.
I can move in on the next portion of that. And the idea there that how do we deal with moving from a carbon economy to a different economy is one of the big kind of stumbling blocks on that is, we have all of this infrastructure that's already there. How do we avoid stranding it before its time, which would just put a very, very large burden on our personal economy. And the idea there is to try and reuse as much of it as possible. So we've got all of this very intricate, and a lot of it is fairly modern infrastructure used for moving hydrocarbons around. And so the idea there is how do we use it for hydrocarbon movement, because that's what it's designed for. And it's very hard to kind of repurpose something quickly without very large, revamping costs. So if you're looking for ways to reuse hydrocarbons, then you're wanting to do something that still uses hydrocarbons. But if we want it to be also kind of helping us reduce our carbon load, we need to find a way to make hydrocarbons from non-fossil sources. So this is your biofuels and your high hydrogen loading natural gas. And one of the other things that's coming up recently in conversations a lot more is carbon capture and storage. And the idea there is that we can just take the CO2 out of the air and we can put it somewhere that we can need it. There's a big project called that some people on this call might have heard of, called the carbon trunk line. And that's basically where we take CO2 out of the atmosphere or from other sources that it might be emitted from, and we put it in a big pipeline and we just send it to a storage facility. But CO2 is actually a fairly good precursor for a lot of things. And as a nuclear guy, one of our catchphrases is "It's only waste if you waste it." So we need to start thinking about what we can do with carbon dioxide that we can actually use for other alternatives. One of the easiest things to do is to set up greenhouses, and you can just flood your greenhouse with CO2 and really help drive plant growth in there. And it really helps out that, so you get a better yield and you get bigger plants and more flavorful things and whatnot. But another thing that's kind of coming down the pipeline in the near future is what's called synthetic fuels, where you take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and you use a high energy source, something like a very large wind farm or a nuclear plant, and you actually make hydrocarbon fuels out of the CO2 that you pulled from the atmosphere. And since these are from the atmosphere, they're actually considered net zero carbon. It's not adding any more carbon, but it's not taking any away. And so every gallon or liter or cubic meter of synthetic fuels that you make displaces an equivalent amount of regular fuels, which prevents more CO2 from getting into the atmosphere. So if we start thinking about things in terms of how can we utilize things that we think are generally negative in new and novel ways, we can actually help the economy and the environment at the same time without causing any loss of stranded assets or something like that. So I think that's kind of a lateral thinking device that might help us out in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I think I would suggest that the energy sector has actually been doing this for much longer than they get credit for. They've long been thinking about how they become more efficient, more cost-effective, more streamlined, more sustainable, all those sorts of things. And I don't think they actually get the credit they deserve for some of the innovation that they have tried to this point. So this isn't necessarily a new question. I think this is something that's been ongoing. You just look at what I've been trying to do. I put my first company in the market in 1982, long before even the whole notion of clean tech was even thought about it. And that company is still rolling along quite happily now. It's north of a $10 million company annually and doing just fine in the clean tech space. So it's not a new question. There are lots of challenges and opportunities, as Sean and David have pointed out. But I think going forward, increasingly, the challenges and the opportunities need to be met by developing companies or business in a mix of both intrapreneurship and entrepreneurship with that future-proof notion that are relevant somewhere down the road, to David's point earlier about not just nibbling around the edges. We need to be thinking about, it takes a long time to get these solutions into the market. So you don't just think about it today and put it in tomorrow. If you're really thinking about disruptive technologies, it's a 6 to 10 year process to really make a substantive change that is a significant significant process, not just nibbling around the edges. So challenges, I guess, for some of the companies, particularly the larger ones, is maintaining that capable workforce. So how do people stay educated, stay current, stay future oriented in where they're going so that they can reinvent themselves within large systems. So there's lots of possibilities as long as you're looking at maintaining that capable workforce. Knowing the industry challenges, I think, for people who are on this discussion this morning, that's a real opportunity. So take the time to talk to people, understand what the emerging challenges are, and identifying the solutions that address some of those challenges, and what kind of people skills do they need, what kind of business models do we need. That's a big point. Like there's a lot of stuff there's new and very different multi-sided business models that need to be looked at, how we engage these emerging challenges. So lots of different things there. And then I guess for people who are on the call, knowing how you reinvent yourself and morph yourself into this new paradigm is a way to go. So the intrapreneurship, for those of you that might be in large systems, is something to think about. David will know about this, but was part of the group that was leading ATCO's innovation teams. We did a intrapreneur or an innovation challenge within the company where we challenged people within the company to come up, all 9,000 of them, to come up with some really interesting novel technologies. And they literally went through a Dragon's Den kind of approach to come out the other end. And they were third-party reviewed, and then those decisions were put into the market. So there's lots of different things to be thinking about that. And then I think the other, maybe this goes back to the first question, I should have tossed this in there, is there are opportunities as you sell yourself into this new future, and companies are looking at new different ways to redefine your paperwork. So doing things like a project resume instead of a professional resume, I think those are all things to be thinking about. So you actually don't worry about where you went to school as much as I did this project, I developed these capacities, and so consequently I now have these new skills. So, new employers, particularly in the entrepreneur space, are looking for these new capacities. So if you can define your experience in knowledge and capacity, that's a pretty valuable thing to go forward.
Thank you. So not only do we have to reinvent ourselves, we need to reinvent how we actually market ourselves to potential employers or for potential work. Thank you. Now, one of the challenges I'm wondering about is just government. And I noticed that Alberta signed an MOU with New Brunswick, Ontario, and Saskatchewan to work to support the development and deployment of small modular nuclear reactors, which could provide reliable, non-emitting, low-cost energy supply for on-grid and off-grid communities around Alberta. What do you think of the potential for this, and what does it mean for, just the citizens of Alberta in general for energy?
I think my responses to this will be pretty easy to guess. So how about do you guys want me to go first, or can I jump in after? All right. Well, I think the thing about the SMR MOU is that as much as I am very much in favor of this work happening in Alberta, the thing that is most important to remember is that until we actually get a budget on it, that it is just a publicity stunt at this point. I would really love to see a budget with actual dollars and cents saying, this is what we want to see happen. This is how we're going to do it. And these are the groups that are going to be on demand to actually work with this. So that's what we're really hoping to see soon. But the potential for small modular reactors is quite literally transformative. We're talking about a technology that can do a lot of things at very different scales. We could power off-grid communities and get them completely off of diesel power units. We could provide process heat for chemical interactions and chemical processing all throughout Alberta without burning a single gallon of natural gas to power these. We could basically get it. Small modular reactors are basically flexible enough in scale and scope that all of the really kind of niche parts that we still use fossil fuels for heat and industry can actually be moved finally off of that without requiring massive infrastructure upgrades for electrification and work like that. We can do it kind of piecemeal as we have the economic ability for it. And it allows us a lot of flexibility in how we move our energy system away from fossil fuel dependency. So the idea that with a small modular reactor doesn't it you can kind of tailor what your response to a system can be based on how much you need. It doesn't matter if it's 300 megawatts or if it's 1 megawatt. There's designs for all of that. But until we get that dollar and cents figure and a roadmap, and more than just the federal SMR roadmap, because we do have that, and that details, here's how Canada wants to move forward with SMRs. Until we get something a little more concrete and say, we want to have an SMR by this time, it's going to be in this place, it's going to employ this many people, it's from this company, and you start sourcing other like projects for companies to bid on, saying, we have an SMR that might fit in this position and do this much work for this chemical processing company, or for this cement plant, or for this wastewater treatment plant. So until we start getting actual physical and hard numbers on this, it's a nice idea, but we have to keep pushing for it.
Okay. Anyone else want to jump in?
Can I jump in there, David, or do you want to go?
Oh, no, you go, please.
Okay, great. I think it's great to see government provide this kind of leadership. It does open the door for the more fulsome discussions around what these kinds of opportunities really mean. It does allow us to explore everything, and we do need to explore and validate all these sorts of things. So there's a leadership piece here, and it's good to see that. Part of the challenge with new technologies and getting them into the market is the regulatory environment. So there's a lot of solutions that are just sitting there waiting to go. It's not like we need to invent a lot of this stuff. It's already there. So we need, if anything, we need the talented workforce that can deliver a bunch of these things. That's maybe one of the biggest challenges I hear from the larger operators is, how do we morph our people so that they can be, they're able to make meaningful contributions to some of these new opportunities that come along. And I think it was Maggie Hanna at Suncor developed one of these little local kinds of, I think it was 5 megawatts, if I remember correctly, Sean. I don't know if you know them, but it was great. And we tried to get it into the market, 10 years ago. We couldn't even have a conversation about this. People just said, nope, not interested. So I think if it just opens the opportunity for dialogue, public input, industry association discussions, all those sorts of things that look at where the opportunity is for these new technologies and what the regulatory challenges are, that's important. Because I think a lot of the solutions that we look at initially, we think about them as a developed nation or an immediate local market application, right? We have the opportunity now as we morph towards a new energy mix around the world to not make the same mistakes we did in some of these developing nations particularly. So it's not just thinking about what the opportunity here, it's what is the opportunity elsewhere to not make the same mistakes we might have made elsewhere and explore more sustainable solutions for other places. So the solutions we look at need to be somewhat more ubiquitous and not local. So how do they apply to northern communities, to First Nations communities, to developing countries, all that sort of thing. And certainly the stuff that this question talks about is has a lot of value, and it'd be great to have a more fulsome discussion about it. So I think those MRUs open the door for that kind of thing.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, just maybe a brief comment is agree with what's been said. I think it's important to recognize that Canada has made a commitment. 72 or more other countries around the world have made a commitment to net zero emissions by 2050, and that is going to drive a lot of innovation and resource and development. There's tons of ways that you can incrementally reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, but when you actually start thinking about what net zero looks like in 2050, there's not that many options we have. We're talking about electricity, an electrical zero emission electricity and zero emission fuels. Sean's talked about some of those. There's different kinds of ways of making zero emission electricity and different kinds of zero emission fuels that one could make. But basically, we need both of those in our energy systems in the future. And I think it's really important. This is a great announcement by the federal government and the provinces to get together. Hopefully the federal government will come in and help to support it as well. Because what we have to figure out as Canadians, what kind of a zero emission, net zero emission energy system do we want in Canada that we can not only provide the needs for Canadians, but also, I would argue, provide export opportunities for the world. And we're sort of retooling. About every 60 years or so, if you go back in time, Canada rethinks its energy systems, and we did it back in the 50s and 60s. It's time for us to do it again now, and I think this is in some ways it's a pretty exciting, I would say, for pretty disrupting for younger people coming into trying to find a job in this, because it's not sure where the jobs are going to be. And so, but thinking about it, and I think the nuclear is one has a lot to offer as long as they can demonstrate that it's safe and secure and get public confidence, and they can do it economically. And I think in order to do that, you need some public money to help them along.
Thank you. Thank you. It's only because when I read about the small modular reactors, I thought, oh, this could solve some of the problems we're having in our northern communities. Of course, not every solution is the perfect solution. So I think I'm going to move to the questions that we've received from the audience. So the first question is, sustainable for the future needs to be part of our reinvention, innovation, and creativity. What do the panelists think about this? Plastics are wonderful, but we need more recycling industry, and costs include this aspect. But we need more recycling industry, and costs include this aspect of business.
I'll take a shot at that one. And I'm 100% on board with the idea that we need a lot more recycling going on in our society. We do tend to throw away too much of it, and I'm not in favor of that from a kind of a bizarre angle. Is that every time you throw something away, you're not only throwing away the thing, you're also throwing away the energy that was used to make it. So if we want to be a lot more efficient with our energy uses, we have to be more efficient with our materials and our product uses. So there's a theory going on, or a conversation talking about circularizing the economy, basically making it so that everything that goes into the economy gets reused as much as possible, so that we can minimize our waste and do this. And a lot of people kind of have this idea that circularizing the economy involves, reducing our inputs, reducing our requirements, reducing the amount of energy that we need, and so that recycling, it will allow us to reduce our energy. But unfortunately, the problem is that right now, recycling is actually extremely energy intensive. It takes a lot of energy to take something that is broken and reform it into something that is new. And in a lot of cases, it actually takes more energy to do that than it does to just make a new thing from scratch. So if we want to really be, steadfast and say we need to recycle more and we need to circularize the economy, I think what we need to come to grips with is that we're going to need a lot more energy to do that. If you want to recycle 100% of paper and 100% of plastics, you need an absolutely enormous amount of energy. We're talking doubling or even tripling our global energy budget to do that. And on the plus side, that means that there's going to be a lot more jobs in the energy industry. But that is something that we need to come to grips with, is that if we really want to be more efficient, we need more energy to do it with. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say
I
this
can comment.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, David. No, go ahead.
Well, my only comment was just one thing. Certainly, Sean talked about the wasting the energy that was used to make it, but there's also a lot of energy embedded within the plastics, etc. There's a huge amount of energy embedded, and so one of the one of the challenges, though, is extracting that energy out, because most of our materials are carbon based. Extracting that material out can release carbon into the atmosphere. I think we're going to find in the future that there's a lot more interest in getting the energy out, but capturing the carbon and sequestering the carbon, and especially in a province like Alberta, where we got holy rocks. We got rocks with lots of holes in them, and we can safely and securely put CO2 in the subsurface. We know how to do that. I think we're going to see it does require being done at scale. It's not something you do at small scale. You have to do it at large scale. And but I think we are going to see, as we retool the energy system, CO2 pipelines and sequestration sites in the province. And I think this could open up opportunities for getting the energy back out of materials if it's not technologically feasible to recycle them and make them back into more plastics, etc. So, and obviously, this is an issue about logistics and costs. And but I think there's going to be much more focus on trying to figure out how to at least get the energy back out of the materials that we are wasting, or that are now going into our landfills or waterways.
Thank you. Jeff?
Yeah, I think this whole notion of sustainability, I think, is absolutely central to everything we do. The challenge is it's a bit like what sustainable development meant to people 20 years ago. You talk to 50 people, you get 50 different answers. So, what does it really mean operationally or definitively in terms of what success looks like? I think that's part of what needs to be in the discussion here is what do we agree on? What does that mean? So how do you measure it, and how do you define it, and what does it mean in terms of what success looks like? And Sean's comment about the circular economy is critical, right? More and more and more companies are looking at ESG kinds of ways of looking at things, at a circular economy around how they look at their waste streams and then repurpose those into resource streams. The energy sector's been doing that for a long time, so that's part of their way to be more efficient with what they do. But they also the notion, I think, of a cradle to cradle notion of thinking, not a cradle to grave, but a cradle to cradle. So not just from finish, but what do we do with those waste products, those byproducts? How do we turn those new ideas, those old things into resources? And if you look in the entrepreneurial world right now, I would suggest the vast majority of companies that are coming together are dealing with this challenge. Like wastewater treatment and plastics redeployment, and particularly in the bio world, like in Northern Europe, for example, they're now importing feedstock because they just can't get enough of it, right? So there's a lot of opportunities in that space to look at around that stuff as to where that's going to go. And I think education is probably central to a lot of it. So that starting help, and this has been going on since environmental education or environmental literacy started back in the 70s, helping people to understand the implications, the planetary or the ecological health implications of their consumption choices. So what does that mean for when I go and buy this or I buy that? How sustainable is that product or that food item or that vehicle or that whatever, or even the energy source that I buy? So, and all the discussion about CCS, CCU, or carbon capture and storage conversion, or whatever, that's emissions reductions Alberta's last call, right? So there's $70 million on the table for companies of all sorts, big and small, to go and develop new solutions that they could take advantage of what that post-combustion carbon represents as an opportunity. So I think it's central to where we need to go. There's a ton of opportunities in there. We just need to explore them and understand how they fit our unique skill set as a person.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. Okay. So you guys just answered the next question, so that's great. I'll move to the next one. Didn't the EU meet their Kyoto Protocol by switching from coal-powered energy to natural gas? Is this possible for Alberta? And if so, who would be accountable to make the switch? I'm not answering.
We're going to hand that one off to one of the other guys.
I'm a little bit aware of that. I'm not sure they've entirely hit their targets there, but they're moving in the right direction, I'd say. So the challenge, I think, in comparing different areas around the world are the drivers for business decisions and consumption and a whole bunch of things like that, government mandates, that sort of thing. Certainly, I mean, I spent a lot of time commercializing biosolutions, everything from woody biomass to algae solutions across Northern Europe. Their drivers for making those kinds of decisions are profoundly different than ours. Their regulations are profoundly different than ours. Even the public awareness and sentiments around these sorts of things, very different, excuse me, very different than us. Not good or bad, not right or wrong, just different. So I think it's an opportunity for us to learn from those sorts of places who might be slightly ahead of us in the decision-making curve because they need to be. But it's also a place for us to deploy to those sorts of locales, particularly Africa right now, which is putting in all kinds of efforts to be more sustainable in the energy procurement and development systems, largely from solutions that are coming from Canada and from Europe, including Northern Europe. So I think the other question in all of this too is you have to look at what the net zero implications are for the whole cradle to cradle thing that we just talked about. So what's the greenhouse gas footprint of all of the procurement of renewables if you're doing that? And what is the whole operational piece to that? So everybody talks about the efficiency savings or the low carbon operations you might have just on the operations of it, but what are the building and the decommissioning implications for that as well? So understanding what all that stuff looks like in situ to where you are is different from place to place to place. So I think it's an opportunity for us to learn from those places who are ahead of us, opportunity for us to deploy our solutions that get developed here in those markets. But yeah, so even on the coal front, I mean, the Alberta government has basically said by 2030 that coal can't be used anymore. So there's a lot of utilities, including ATCO, for example, was off coal fully 10 years before they needed to be, right? So there are a lot of decarbonization solutions going into that sort of thing, and we are learning those sorts of things from those other kinds of jurisdictions who are leading the way.
Maybe I could comment as well. As one of the things to remember is that the Kyoto Agreement was a commitment was actually made almost 23 years ago. In another month and a half, it was 23 years ago. It's December 1997. And the commitment was to be done by, the 2012 would be the end of the Kyoto Agreement period. Since at that time, everything was about incremental change. Canada's target was a 6% reduction of 1990 emissions, right? And we still haven't met that target, by the way. We're still not down to the 6% reduction of 1990. In Europe, what's happened in the last few years is climate change has become more severe. Climate impacts are becoming severe. People are getting more concerned. The science is even stronger now than it was, certainly stronger than it was 20 years ago. And everybody's talking now about net zero by 2050. There's also been a lot of development of technologies around, say, batteries and electric vehicles, and that is showing that there are transition pathways that seem to be coming out of the fuzz, is in the clouds, and we're starting to see what a net zero 2050 might look like. And I think that the goalposts have changed. We're no longer talking about just incremental reduction. We're talking about transformative change, and I think that we know now, 20 years ago, it was 50 years until we reached 2050, right? Now it's only 30 years. And all the infrastructure you build in the next 10 years will probably still be around in 30 years, right? And still be, so there's a real consideration. We need much more thinking about transformative change and transition pathways. And I think there is a role for natural gas, and we're going to see it. The question is that when the companies we're talking to, it's okay, let's build and we're going to use natural gas now, but can we transition maybe in 10 years to hydrogen as the carbon pricing changes and technologies and we build a hydrogen economy? Or do we transition to renewable natural gas or to other kinds of more zero emission type of fuels that will replace natural gas? And I think even the natural gas companies are highly engaged in looking at net zero alternatives, which should still use the infrastructure, et cetera, and provide the energy needs that society has.
All right. I can't say that I'm very much of an expert on the Kyoto Accords, seeing as how I was 8 years old when they were signed. So,
All right, now you make me feel really old.
sorry for dating everyone here, but I can weigh in a little bit on the idea of using natural gas as the quote unquote bridge fuel that a lot of people have tried to say is what we need to do in order to work through this transformative change. And it's not the worst idea that anyone has ever had, because it does use a lot of the same infrastructure that we have, and it helps avoid those stranded infrastructure costs that I was talking about earlier. But the problem is that natural gas right now is so cheap and it's so prevalent that a lot of people are just they're giving it a lot more leeway than they really should for what it does. Like the natural gas fields in North Dakota are a super fun site waiting to happen. There's so much production going on, and they have to keep producing because our appetite for it, as we're trying to get off of coal by any means necessary that we have, is so much that they're flaring off so much of that natural gas all the time because they can't afford the time to take the natural gas and make sure that it's properly purified and send it out at the quality that people might want of it. Instead, they're just taking it, separating out the good stuff as quickly as they can, and then flaring the rest of it because it's cheaper that way, and they have to make those production quotas because otherwise the lights go off in 30 cities. So the idea there is that natural gas is a way for us to move off, but we have to make sure that we are still thinking about how do we do this properly and not rush forward to a potential solution and miss a lot of potholes that we leave behind on the way, because we have to fill those in eventually, and the bill does come due in time. So we have to look at what we're doing right now with natural gas and be, is this actually beneficial to us? Like, are we pushing natural gas too hard for what it's capable of doing, or are we just kind of ignoring a lot of the problems that are cropping up with it because we're avoiding other solutions that are available to us? And as the nuclear guy says, I'm against natural gas kind of almost on principle, because I'm just like, we have nuclear solutions. But it's I do think that natural gas is, in fact, it's better than coal if you do it properly. If you don't do it properly, it's actually just as bad. So that's the problem, is that a lot of things you need to just make sure that you do it right in order to get the benefits that you need out of it.
Okay,
But
thank you.
Lynn, I think if I just pop in with one quick comment, I think the opportunity for the people on the phone here is to look at the alignment, look at on the call here is to look at the alignment between what those EU kind of renewable or alternative companies are doing, and what is the correlation or the alignment with how the market is morphing here, because those solutions are going to come here eventually. So, and how does their skill set, how's their capacity, how's their interest, all that sort of thing line up with it? Because we see it already happening. There's companies like Steeper Energy, which is a Calgary company, developed all kinds of bio solutions, couldn't find a market here, so they got 4 projects going in Northern Europe. Now they're coming back here. Blue Eden, a tank wash and a water treatment and hydrogen company, all developed again here, developed their solution here, deployed in Germany. Now they're coming back, right? Iguana Technologies, battery storage, right? Developed here, got deployment in Northern Europe and Hawaii, coming back here. Companies like E-Decisions, they're the metric that helps all those other little companies understand what the market fit is. So there's a lot of that kind of thing happening, and how you align yourself and coordinate yourself with those sorts of things. So, yeah, so I think the opportunity is to know what those solutions are that have immediate market, company, regulatory interest here, and see how you align with them.
Thank you. An interesting aside, speaking about ages, my brother and sister-in-law David and Vicky. They were Canadian negotiators in Rio and for the Kyoto Accord on behalf of the Canadian government. And I never would tell anybody that while living in Alberta years ago, because it was kind of seen as a dirty little family secret. And now I think, wow, we've come a long way, but we haven't come a long way. So I think that what you are discussing here is so important for our audience to hear. So the next question is, given Sean's comments about where Alberta sits in terms of transitioning the nuclear, should people be looking outside the province for employment when our need is more immediate? So are you telling people to leave Alberta?
If you're wanting to get into the nuclear industry, unfortunately, right now you kind of have to. It's a sad fact of how the last 30 years of the Canadian nuclear industry has worked out. However, there are lots of opportunities for you to prep yourself to get ready for a nuclear industry that might come to Alberta. There are lots of jobs right now in Alberta that require a lot of the same training that you would need to actually work in a nuclear facility. Most of it is radiation safety training. It's basically how do you operate around radioactive sources and radioactive materials. And a lot of places, ironically, in the oil sands actually require this training because we use radioactive isotopes for a lot of things, like an actual staggering amount of things. One of the most common uses of radioactive sources in Alberta right now is actually for pipeline inspection. You have people who are trained in using gamma sources to detect whether or not there are flaws in welds on pipelines or other construction materials. So people with that kind of training have an easier time in moving forward to get other more specific training for working in nuclear facilities because they already have that baseline level and they can kind of upgrade that or transition a little bit more easily. But if you're looking for something that is, not outside or in a camp or in the middle of nowhere in -40, where you're sitting with your gamma source trying to do your non-destructive testing in the middle of a snowstorm, then yeah, you're going to have to move to Ontario or New Brunswick. I hear New Brunswick is very nice, but those are the only places with nuclear facilities in Canada right now. But if you do that, there's a big possibility that you'd be able to come back to Alberta and you could be the person who gets paid the big dollars to train more people to get that industry here in Alberta. Because if the MOU signing does work and we do actually see SMRs or even large scale reactors happening in Alberta, we're going to need a lot of people who are able to work in that industry. Back in 2003 to 2009, when there was that Bruce Power project being looked at in Peace River, the estimates for how many people would be involved in its construction ended up being approximately, the report that was on it said that building that one nuclear facility in Peace River would employ 10% of all welders, pipe fitters, and boilermakers in the province. That is a staggering number of people. So if you're really wanting to be in the nuclear industry and you really want to, get ahead of that curve and ride that wave as far as you can, yeah, you're going to have to go to Ontario right now, get a job at Bruce Power or Pickering or Darlington. But you might be able to leverage that to come back and train all of those people that might be needed in Alberta. And I would love to see more people do that, actually, as much as it pains me to say, yeah, go leave Alberta. If you go leave Alberta and you come back and you help leverage that knowledge that you've gained to train 50 more people to do this, you've made an enormous impact in the strength of the Albertan economy.
Okay, I think you're on mute, Lynn, but I can't hear you. But
Sorry, yes.
that's all right. So maybe I could. I think there are huge opportunities in the new low carbon economy that can be in Alberta in today, and where there's the federal government is coming out with its hydrogen strategy within the next 4 weeks or so, 4 weeks from now. Obviously, there's a lot of different pieces of that. It's a pan-Canadian strategy. The market opportunity is huge, and the place that has the biggest opportunity is actually in Alberta. And that's because we have, as Sean said, we have really low cost natural gas. We have a lot of it. It's down under $2 a gigajoule is a unit of energy, where it's so that's an incredibly low cost, and we can convert it into hydrogen and put the CO2 into the ground and still have a hydrogen paying for all of the CO2 sequestration. We can have a hydrogen that is still at half the cost of diesel fuel. So that the cost per unit of energy of hydrogen made from natural gas, with technologies that exist today, which is already actually going on in Alberta, can produce a fuel that is half the cost of wholesale cost of diesel, about a third of the retail cost. That opens up a huge market opportunity, which we've been working with tons of different companies across Alberta on all parts of the value chain that are getting quite excited about the opportunity that hydrogen offers to start producing the fuels that the world wants, and that can really decarbonize the Alberta economy, but still use our resources. Alberta's right now, we produce in Alberta about 5,400 tons of hydrogen a day. That's what we're producing today. We use it mostly to crack bitumen, to make gasoline and diesel, to make fertilizer, nitrogen, and a few other things. We don't use it as a fuel. The possibility of greening that hydrogen to make, we release the CO2 from making that hydrogen from most of our hydrogen made in Alberta today. There is a possibility, and a lot of companies are looking at sequestering the CO2 and decreasing their emissions associated with making bitumen and gasoline and fertilizer. And we have the infrastructure to do that. But there's also a huge interest in taking that hydrogen and making it a fuel for driving trucks, heavy trucks, for heating homes, even as an energy storage for electricity to help renewables, to be able to restore renewables. When you have too much renewable electricity, you can make it into hydrogen, and then you can make it back into electricity to help expand the renewables. So I think we're going to see within the next few weeks a new announcements on hydrogen economy across Canada that opens up a tremendous number of jobs within this province.
Oh, excellent. Good news. Yes, and I was on mute because the city of Calgary is doing something on my street. My tax dollar is in action.
That's right.
Okay,
The
Jeff.
joys of working from home.
Yeah.
Short answer to the question actually is no. You don't need to leave the province. But having said that, the opportunity to do that is maybe better than it's ever been. I know lots of people who love the opportunity to leave the province and go and develop a technology elsewhere. Whether it originated here or not doesn't really matter. So they develop that skill set and the capacities, and they come back here more equipped or more saleable or more of interest to the local community here than they would have had they stayed here to develop that. Not everybody wants to do that. I mean that's fine. But the mobility to be able to move around and do things is better than it's ever been. You look at Questor, for example. They're an interesting company that developed here, went to Colorado to get success, and now they're coming back again. I was on a call yesterday, I guess, with a company called Drisha, which is partially developed in India, but the main company is here. And partway through the conversation, one of the people on the phone said, "Well, what do you mean? You're not in Calgary?" This guy was in Bangalore, southern India. They've been working together for 6 months. They had no idea. So in a COVID world, it's actually a bit easier to be semi-virtual in how you do, to build out where you're going to go, to do all the different things you want to do. Because frankly, a lot of people don't really care anymore where you are, as long as you can deliver what it is that they're looking for. So doing maybe some of your own customer discovery, as it's called in the entrepreneurial world, developing that market fit, that understanding of what customers are looking for in terms of their pain and challenge. Maybe that's what you need to do if you're really interested in staying here. Have that engagement with potential customers, understand what it is that they're looking for, and how you reinvent yourself in that mold. But I don't think you need to leave unless you want to.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I
So
can
COVID's
add
been
on
a good thing.
that on
Yes.
when just as Jeff was saying, you don't have to leave unless you want to. But the thing with leaving is that if you play your cards right, you can quote unquote go uphill both ways. You can leave Alberta and you can go someplace that's a little easier to kind of live in, and you can get the skills that you want, and you can earn, get more money, and get build a financial kind of sustainability for yourself when you've gone somewhere else. And then what you can do, if it's something that you've left to pursue because it's not in Alberta, and you gain all those skills, and then as Jeff said, once you have those skills, you can come back to Alberta where we don't have these sets of skills that you have, and you can start charging more for what you have because now you are a rare commodity here. So you can have your cake and eat it too. You can go uphill both ways, and you can leave for a little bit and come back, and things will be better for you because you'll be in a better place for it.
That totally makes sense. But I just want the government of Alberta to know we are not advocating for our talent to leave Alberta. Okay.
It's still saying
Okay.
come back.
We need all the
I know
help we
they're
can
still
get.
coming back. You're right.
Yep.
Pardon me, Jeff?
We need all the help we can
Oh,
get, as all three of us have said. So I think that the
it's true.
challenge is to how do we explore how we fit into a new and emerging low carbon diversified kind of an economy. I mean, the government has said they want to do that, right? Minister Spicer's primary role is to look at how we do that kind of diversification, and Doug's great at that kind of thinking. He's well placed to do this. So um, yeah, so I think there's lots of opportunities to stay here, and lots of good thinking in that regard.
So we're on the cusp of change. Okay, the last question I have so far from the audience is how Canada could help economies with different priorities besides net zero GH0 emissions. I'm thinking in communities where citizens are struggling to have access to clean water, public transport, internet, and a decent wave. How how will we sell the idea of sustainability and affordability and ethical energy sources?
Uh, I'll hop on that
I was
if
going to
no
say,
one
is that
has any questions.
SMRs?
The thing with developing countries and developing societies that are looking to get those foundational things like clean water and like reliable energy and stuff like that. The thing I'm sure a lot of people have heard about a guy named Hans Rosling. Maybe he did a lot of work several years ago. I think he actually passed away not that long ago. If I'm wrong, Mr. Rosling, I'm sorry for telling people that you're dead, but the idea that he puts forward is that the way that people's lives increase in quality is most strongly tied to their access to energy. So if we in Canada have the ability to export energy solutions that are a lot more environmentally friendly and a lot more conscientious of their entire life cycle, whether that's solar or wind or expertise in building hydro dams or nuclear, doesn't really matter what it is. If we have the people who have the skills to do those things and we have the ability to export them because we have enough people to do it and without impacting our own society, then we should 100% do that. Because if we can get people to the point where they have enough energy that they can start making sure that they have reliable access to clean water and electricity for education and internet and all of these things, they're going to remember that we helped them get to that point, and we're going to build a much stronger relationship with that, especially if we can help them avoid a lot of the pitfalls that Canada has fallen into on its own road, where it had to do pretty much all of it the first time by itself. So having that kind of helping hand, being like, hey, like, we know you want this because this is what's going to allow you to do literally everything else. So here are the technologies that we have, and we're going to help you build them, and we're going to show you how to build them, and then you can just call us and we'll send over some consultants to help you keep sure that everything is running until you're on your feet. And then at that point then we're just trading between equals at every level. So the more people that we can help get those really foundational things that require energy to really promote and allow, even if it's something as simple as, getting washing machines in everyone's house so that they don't need to go to the well to pick up water. It's really kind of something that we don't think about in Alberta or even Canada, because we've had a fundamental electrical grid for so long that it's just kind of not having a washing machine, like that's like something from the 30s. So if we can get those people to have all of these, basic foundational things, and we get them to the point where they start trading with us as equals, that benefits everyone in all ways. So yeah, we need to start exporting our clean energy solutions and our clean energy expertise as soon as possible.
In fact, that is already happening. I would suggest at an epic rate. Like we are Albert particularly very, very good at exporting our technologies. Perhaps too good, because some of it should be deployed here first before we just everybody else, right? But when you look at developing these new solutions, it's always for these early companies anyway. It's the path of least resistance to that early revenue. So that's where they're going to go, because that's what they need to do in order to be able to scale, and then maybe come back here to be a viable market partner, as we've talked about. So happening a lot, those global markets, particularly in developing nations, to like we talked about, not reinvent the problems that we created here, is a huge market. It's an absolutely massive, multi-billion dollar market, right? So we're very good at getting there, and typically we use international partners to do that, particularly strategic partners. You'll find a lot of Alberta Technologies strategically partnering with in situ companies in different places. So that's PASH, PASH, the PASH Energy Group out of England, that puts all kinds of renewables into Africa. Right? So a lot of Canadian companies work with them to do that sort of thing as a financier. A consortia approach is also the way to go. You have to think about how you assemble an international founders team around this, so you understand the cultural differences that are there, the economic drivers that may or may not be different than here. And it's more about the quadruple bottom line thinking now of the economic, social, environmental, and cultural implications of what a business opportunity is going to be. And culturally is cultural is being considered more important all the time, as we increasingly become a borderless society and look at globalization of some of these solutions. And we're already a leader in doing this, so there's lots of opportunities for us to continue to do that more. But I don't think it has to be a one or the other. Just because we send a solution to Ghana doesn't mean we can't deploy it here as well, right? So there's lots of opportunity to do these things in parallel. The Canadian Trades Commissioner Services, those guys are total rock stars. If you're thinking about looking at putting these things in the foreign markets and you have not talked to the Trades Commissioner in your area, I would really strongly encourage you to do that. They're all over the place. Yvonne Gruenthaler is the local one here in Calgary. Fantastic, right? Same for EDC, the Export Development Bank, and the Development Bank for Canada. So Juan Benitez is right here in Calgary. Again, total rock star. Fantastic. Can't say enough good things about the kind of support those kinds of organizations provide for exporting technologies to different places. And I'm associated with Foresight, the Foresight Clean Technology Center, which operates in BC, but also operates here in Saskatchewan. I would say the majority, more than half of the companies that have gone through that, just close to 40 now, their markets are overseas. So again, it's a parallel deployment. They'll work here and they'll work overseas. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. Mars is doing the same thing. Creative Destruction Lab, Creative Destruction Lab, all those kinds of accelerators, all kinds of coming out of it. So lots of opportunity, big market, but it doesn't have to be just that one.
Thank you. Good news. Good news. David.
Maybe I'll just take a slightly different angle on this. One of the things, we live in a time of disruptive change now. There's a lot of forces of change. And the forces of change on the energy system aren't just about greenhouse gas emissions. There are a lot of other problems with our energy systems than greenhouse gas emissions. I'll give you an example. Personal mobility, which is a key part of our energy system, in terms of how we move around from place to place. It's incredibly expensive. It's got a greenhouse gas problem. It's got an air pollution problem, but it's actually got a pretty big economic problem in that you spend, typical family spends $40,000 or so for a car. We use it 4% of the time. 96% of the time, it's parked on the most expensive land in Canada. The cost of the typical cost is about $12,000 to $14,000 a year per household. That is an average household cost in Canada. And it's one of the largest. And yet, we don't use it very much. It's a stranded asset 96% of the time. So the forces of transformational change aren't just about climate change, and it's about the movement towards autonomous vehicles, autonomous shared connected vehicles. Totally different ways of business models for personal mobility are, of course, what Tesla and most of the energy car companies are going for. And what we see at a time of this kind of disruptive change, the issue of how to direct disruption in order to achieve other societal goals. We want lower greenhouse gas emissions. We want lower air pollutions. We want fewer car accidents. We want, lower costs. We want more convenience. It'd be really nice to get rid of parking lots and not have to, all of that kind of stuff. So these total rethink of our transportation system is what's happening right now. And we're going to see this in the next 10 years. So I would argue that for the people on the call, if they're looking for new opportunities, it's a lot. Our energy systems in Alberta, we tend to think our energy systems are about producing gasoline or diesel. It's about producing a product. Our energy system is the whole thing. It's from the production, the distribution, the consumption of the energy. Rethinking those systems is happening around the world today. And I think the big opportunity for this province and the big opportunity that we've been working on around the hydrogen side is to rethink that whole system. Let's make sure that we create an energy system and a supply chain to that energy system. For the energy system and the vehicles and the trucks we're going to be using in 2035, let's not design it for 2015. And what we're looking at is these other disruptive trends that are occurring, autonomous vehicles, et cetera, which are going to change things. And so I would argue, position your thinking and learning and your direction you're going to be ready for when these things come, and even to help move them along, directing the disruption in a way that would be good for society.
Yeah, I'm just going to hop in on David's comment there before we move on. And yeah, that idea that the energy system is not just creating energy; it's literally every portion of how we use it. That's a good callback to what I was saying, like way much earlier in this conversation, is that you have to think about it from literally every angle. Now, every person here who's paying attention to us is kind of shaking their heads probably at this point. They're just like, I don't know every angle of the energy system. Like, there's no way anyone can know every angle of the energy system without, 5 PhDs and 80 years of doing this work. And even by then, most of their knowledge will be completely obsolete because it'll have changed by then. So you can't know everything about the system that you're trying to work in. But what you can do is you can think about literally any portion of it. When we think about when we talk about, considering it from all angles, it doesn't mean that one person has to consider it from all angles. It means that every person can think about it from any angle that they can think of. And you'll probably have a different angle than someone else. And if you have a different angle from someone else, then you might see something that they might miss, and they might see something that you might miss. And if you can find something that everyone else has missed, which is not actually that hard, it just takes a lot of work, then you have something that you can capitalize on and you can benefit for yourself and everyone else. So it's not the idea that you have to know everything. It's that you just have to keep looking until you find something that works for you. And with something as large and complicated as the energy system in Alberta and beyond, there's a lot of unmarked areas on that map that you can go wandering into and find something amazing. It's really the old Wild West or the Here Be Dragons on the map. If you go into those areas, then you're almost bound to find something that you can come back with a big pile of gold.
So what I'm hearing is that clean tech development is really led by entrepreneurs or people going out and searching for this piece of gold. What talents and skills do you think are needed to effectively kickstart a company focused on this? What skills do you think people need to develop or even acknowledge that they have as they're moving into this space?
I can start that one, I guess. Having now put more than 25 companies in the market over the years and have the scars and the war wounds to show that they come with that sort of thing. It's not an easy task. It's certainly not for everyone to be an entrepreneur. It's exciting and it's daunting, I guess, at the same time. So, but it can be a lot of fun, and you get a chance to work with people in a fashion that I've never found in sort of large business kind of things, where you really find people who are passionate, dedicated, focused, committed, and you're singularly focused on what you're doing. You don't have the bureaucracy or the political highlights that have to manage in large companies. You just go ahead and do what you're going to be doing. You essentially are your own speed bump. So you navigate your own way along there for whatever it is that you want to do. So really, I think the success starts, like I talked about earlier, on that quadruple bottom line approach, but it's really the triangular dynamic, both around that sustainability stool of the three components of sustainability, but also looking at the commercial, economic, and environmental features around where you're going. And the financial part of it is also critical. So having your tech roadmap, having a commercial roadmap and a financial roadmap that are all aligned, that show how you're going to take whatever you're going to do forward, that's sort of critical. But it is entirely 100% predicated on market pull. It's the old line that if you build it, they will come, only works in baseball movies. And if you don't have customer pull, if you don't have customer interest, your solution is not customer driven, you don't really understand the problem solution fit space and have a business model that allows you to make money, it's not going to work. Right? So you can't just go and build a company and build an idea and then go and try and find a customer. That's a solution looking for a problem, which may or may not exist, right? So you really need to be customer driven. The quick to fail notion, also there, right? So you want to all the way along here, follow that quick to fail thing. So whether it's a quick to fail on any kind of an idea, you want to spend a little to learn a lot, or stop. So don't be afraid to say no. Tenaciousness or tenacity and commitment are central to it. You got to have a thick skin. It's lonely at times. You just need to really be ready to go. Surround. My objective in all these sorts of things is always to be the dumbest person in the room, which often isn't hard. But I always want to surround myself with the best people I can find. People much smarter than me. People like the other three people on the call here who make me look good, and you work well with them. But that founders team, making sure that it has the full capacity of skills and talents to deliver the day, is where you want to go. And adopting a portfolio approach, not just one thing, but 4 or 5 things. It's a bit like fishing. They don't call it catching. You spend a lot of time fishing before you catch something. It's like a stock trade. You lose on 80% of your stock trades, but you win well on 20. Putting a company together and making it successful is the same way, right? So having a portfolio approach to that is important, and being simple, being focused, not being too complicated. Like the old line of don't avoid the shiny hubcaps that are going by. So have a very clear vision of where you're going and what you're and follow your bliss in terms of how all that stuff goes. That kind of thing is important. I think the last one for me is keeping the balance. It is not all about work. And if you're just working 24 hours a day, you're not getting outside and going for a walk or spending time with your family, you're getting all those other sort of balance things you need to do, you're not going to be successful.
The same for job search. Thank you, Jeff. You could be a career coach.
I think he is.
I know, it's true. Okay. What are your
thoughts?
thoughts?
The vast majority of the entrepreneurs that we work with in Foresight, certainly, or within Actions Matter, are are people who are displaced from their current roles in a job, and they're going to do something else. They've got an idea, they've validated a problem, and now they need some help trying to figure out how to get that solution in the market. So yeah, there's certainly a certain portion of career counseling around that, or counseling generally, just on many levels. But that's the fun part about it, because you're working with people that are just so passionate and committed and fun to be with.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Anyone
I'll
else's
hop
thought?
on. Oh no, I'll continue to hop on this. One thing that I want to add on to Jeff's talking about is that to get into this whole idea of capitalizing on an entrepreneurship idea, you don't actually have to be the prime mover in it. And in fact, the prime mover is sometimes not even the person that has the most benefit in an entrepreneurship work. Sometimes it's the people that come on after the idea has come out. It's the people who are just like, I don't want to be, the CEO or the leader or the driver, but I want to be part of that team. I want to do that, but I want to have something I don't want to take all of that risk, but I want to be part of that kind of push for it. And so the idea there is that you can look for the entrepreneurs and you can be like, hey, I want to join your team. This is actually what's happened with ANN, with my company, is that I was the guy who was doing the work. I was putting everything out there, and I was just I wasn't getting anything coming back, because if you're starting something off and you don't actually have a product, you're just kind of shouting out into the void. Then the return that you're looking for is not actually money, it's people. And you want to get people who are interested to talk with you, that you can start a conversation, you can move things forward. And that's what happened, is that a little bit after I started getting people responding to me. And those responses led to more opportunities for me. I got invited to the Clean Energy Ministerial back in 2019. I went to that. I went to several conferences in 2019 that happened basically because, since I had kind of put myself out there and started ANN, people reached out to me because they said, I've seen what this guy is doing and he's on the right track that we want to push forward. So they paid for me to do things for them to do that. And it's kind of like consultancy work, but it's less structured than that. So the idea there with entrepreneurship, and if you're looking for a job and you're trying to find something out there, is that it's not about getting your resume out there and doing the old fashioned ground pounding networking that it used to be 30 or 40 years ago. Now it's about getting your ideas and your kind of expression of what you want to do out there. Like, you can literally start a blog and start talking about something that you have knowledge about. And if you actually just keep doing that, eventually someone's going to see it and someone's going to think, hey, this guy has the right idea. And they'll get in contact with you, and then something might come of it. Because that's literally what happened with ANN, is that it was just a blog for a while and I was talking. And then I got contacted by a lawyer who's just like, hey, I've just moved here. I followed your work. Do you want to get in contact with me and we'll see what can happen? And I met up with him and we kind of chatted for a bit, and he came on board and he helped me actually found ANN into an actual company that we're working with right now. So it's as much as I don't like this cliche, because it is just a little bit too cliche, is that your vibe attracts your tribe. The energy that you put out there
It's
attracts
true.
people that also like that energy. And so if you don't want to be an entrepreneur, you just have to try and put out that you are looking for something, whether that's in the conversations with your regular network, or by building a new network, or just by going onto the internet and screaming into the void about certain things for long enough that someone actually hears you and says, I like what that guy or girl is thinking. So the idea is that you kind of have to you kind of just have to showcase what you're doing. And it's a lot more complicated nowadays than it was in the past, because a resume isn't really enough to do it anymore. You have to actually show what you want to do and how you want to do it. But on the plus side, with all of the things that we have at our fingertips now, all the tools and all of the methods of communicating and working like this, you can do some really weird and new things. I am a materials engineer by training. I have 2 degrees in that, and I am now most well known for my writing, which before I started doing this was like grade 10 level, just awful. I was a terrible, terrible writer. But you do things and you learn about it and you get better at it as time. And eventually someone says, I like this. Let's see if we can get in contact with him. And that's what's brought me here. And now people are, for some reason, paying attention to what I'm saying.
Thank you for sharing your story. David, any thoughts?
Not too much more to add to that, I think. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I do have a question for you that's not connected to this. I mean, it's connected to our discussions, but I where did I put it? I've got so many questions. But one is about one of the things your research says you're integrating Canada's agricultural for forest sectors into energy system models. What does this mean? And what does it mean for potential jobs?
Oh, it's an interesting opportunity. I mean, what we've been doing is one of the projects we've been working on is looking at the entire energy system of Alberta and Canada, and energy flows and carbon flows through that system. If you actually think about agriculture and forestry, these are two other systems. They're not really considered the energy systems. One's our food system, and one's sort of our fiber system. But there's a lot of energy and carbon flows moving through those systems as well. So one of the things we've been doing is quantifying that. And what we find is that, in fact, in work done a few years ago, is that the amount of carbon that is pulled out of the atmosphere every year by agriculture in Canada is actually the same amount of carbon, within about 2% actually, of the amount of oil we pull out of the ground in Canada and use for energy. So it gives you a sense in the annual atmospheric pull down of carbon. Now, that's in the total size and scale of our agricultural sector is huge. And it's the same size as our oil industry, right, within 2%. And what this got us thinking is saying, well, what happens? Let's follow that through. That's the amount of carbon that's pulled out in agriculture, but then it goes through and basically by the end of the year, it's all back into the atmosphere again. So we have within our agricultural systems this massive amount of carbon that, photosynthesis and plants pull out of the atmosphere. We have it in our hands effectively, and we let it go back to the atmosphere again. And and only, it's an interesting number, but all of our agricultural system, only about 4% of the solar energy that's collected by our agricultural system ends up in our food products, right, that we eat, right? So 96% conversion losses, if you like, of the overall system. So what we've been doing is looking at that and saying, well, maybe there's ways that you can step into our agri-food system or our forestry system where we have about 50% of our trees that we cut down. Well, basically only about 50% are taken off the land. There's a lot of biomass there. And if we could find ways of either preventing that carbon from going into the atmosphere, there's ideas around biochar, for example, and other sorts of technologies, or harnessing, getting some of the energy out, leaving the nutrients and trying to harness and putting that energy into our energy system. I think that there's some significant opportunities there as we try to move towards net zero. There's a challenge. The economics is always a challenge, in terms of, I think it's a challenge on the small modular reactors and in nuclear. It's certainly a challenge on the biofuels side. I've worked for many years on biological solutions to climate change. I'm a biologist by trade, and very interested in biological solutions. And I think there is some low-hanging fruit, but it's probably more around, if people are interested in agriculture and forestry, is how do we manage this very large carbon flows? It happens to be very distributed across Canada, but could we think of some creative ways of managing that carbon better and then taking credit for it on the offset side? So, and I think there are some exciting things that could happen, especially if we move to carbon capture and storage in our fossil fuels and other sorts of things. You can use the same infrastructure could actually be used by our agri-food sector to sequester carbon through. It's called BECCS, biomass energy coupled to climate carbon capture and storage, and I think there's some quite interesting opportunities there as well. So we
Wow.
don't have, I don't have a solution, right? Packaged one, but I can say there's an incredible resource here. And if people are interested, they can contact me. I'll point them to some academic papers that'll put them to sleep. But I think there's some pretty exciting implications of it. Yeah. So,
Wow.
So the,
Because that's a real renewable. Hmm.
I
so
actually
the
asked you
idea,
a question on that. Oh, Jeff, do you have a question?
no, go ahead, Sean. I'll chime in on Dave's comment.
Because what you were talking about with the biochar aspect was actually reminding me of what I was saying earlier about the circularizing the economy and taking all of that. Society has an enormous amount of bio waste that we create, whether it's food waste or
yeah.
wastewater, anything like that. The idea there is that like biomass is biomass, and it's useful for plants on pretty much any scale as long as it's properly treated. So like what's the is there potential for circularizing our biosystems by using a large input of energy source? So if we have an external energy source and we turn our bio waste into biochar or naturalized fertilizers, like what's the kind of work that might be
You
available
you
in that
probably
sense?
don't need to. There's enough energy in the biomass to actually convert it into biochar. And our analysis of the economics is anything above about $60 a ton of CO2, and it's economic. So if we start having carbon taxes and carbon benefits, there's almost a switch occurs that it could be done around $60 to $70 a ton of CO2. All of a sudden there's some really good economics and you could make the biochar, and the biochar will be put into the soil. It will retain nutrients, acts as a kind of fertilizer, and you can get agricultural benefits. The trick is, and I spent a lot of time working with farmers on soil amendments I started involved in starting companies. This is back a long time ago, before Kyoto. But nonetheless, in that sort of, farmers are not willing to spend a lot of money for soil amendments, right? And so if it has to kind of pay for itself in other ways, because we have vast agricultural lands, and soil amendments, the return on investments aren't that. So the overall economics of the system. But you don't need it. You could just take the biomass, convert it into biochar, put it back into the soils, and you'd probably get a growth response. And sort of the publishing literature on this suggests that you could get some positive benefits to society and a net carbon sink. Build the carbon levels in our soils, and
So everyone
plants
on
would
the
take it
call,
out, end it up in soil.
everyone on
Yeah,
the call, this is one of those things that I was talking about of looking at things from any angle. Like,
exactly
get
right.
on this, people.
Well, and I don't know very many people who don't like to eat. So it is
Yeah.
a bit of an
That is a thing.
people like to eat. And so again, for those on the call, look at the ag tech community. And sort of in the clean tech space generally, they are probably whether right up there with water treatment and some of the carbon capture solutions. They're one of the biggest portions right now, I'd say, of the clean tech community that's trying to go to market as ag tech. And there's a lot of challenges in that space, to do with food security in a COVID world. Like that was one of the crazy things that was going on. Everybody was starting a cart, right? Because they don't really know where our food comes from. And a lot of the food quality we eat, particularly produce stuff, if you're buying a banana in January, where did it come from? So the whole value of understanding that and making sure that what you're eating is actually nutritionally useful to you as a body or as a human being is a bit of a challenge. So understanding the earth footprint of procuring your food. So that can of corn that you buy, what is the GHG footprint for that can of corn? You can buy a can of corn from Tabor, or you can buy a can of corn from Australia. Both good cans of corn. But there's an understanding what the cost of those two things are to get those to you as part of the solution on the sustainability side. The food security one is a big one, not just for here, but in developing nations, as we talked about a little bit. Making sure that they actually have viable food and viable water is an ongoing challenge. It's a big market for ag tech companies. And even food quality. A head of lettuce that's picked in Chile and shipped to you and you buy at your local grocery store and you bring it home, what's left in it for nutritional value? So there's companies like the Harvest Hub, which is a perfect, John, to your point, a perfect circular economy, or Ceres, CERES, luxury both companies here in Calgary, who 100% source locally, use biochar as at least Harvest Hub does, as a growing media. Everything's grown locally, sourced locally, produced locally, so that the farm to table thing can be a couple of meters, not halfway around the planet, right? And they completely reuse everything. So full circular economy. Or you'll have companies like ag tech company like Croissants, which develops renewable energy systems to grow and produce and refine and process food, so you don't have to use fossil fuel systems. The agricultural sector is very energy intense, and their margins are very small. So their ability on the return on investment time to put capital into change is a bit limited. But for those that want to, if they can see the long game and understand what the life cycle, environmental opportunities, economic opportunities are for a decision they make now, it's not a short-term decision. You have to understand how this has a long game on it, like electric combines and electric equipment as opposed to diesel or gas or other sorts of things. Lots of options in that space. So I think it's a huge space. So those on the call, look in the ag tech space if you're interested in this sort of thing. Lots and lots of opportunities there.
Thank you. Yes, David.
Maybe one quick comment is just there's huge disruption in the agricultural space. So lots of changes on plant proteins, real concerns, and these are driven not only by climate change concerns, these are driven by health concerns and other issues. There's a lot of things wrong with our agri-food system that could be improved. That it's the economic viability of farms, etc. So I think what it's really important, and one of the things in terms of thinking about moving into this space, is to really understand the forces that are at play and the kind of changes that are occurring. And that could open up new opportunities. Now, there's a rather radical document that I could send people to if you want an interesting read. It's got one, it's called Rethink X. Rethink X is a report out of Stanford University, and it's one word, Rethink X, and it's got two reports that they've done, one on some of the problems in our personal mobility sector and some of the disruptive forces there, and the other one's on the agri-food sector. And those will, I think you'll find it a very interesting read. I don't believe everything they say in it, but if what you really want to be doing if you're thinking about taking new directions is read about where these, because we live in a time of disruptive change, understand where these sectors are going and some of the forces on them, and then you can position to ride some of those forces and actually maybe direct some of those forces to something that will create job opportunities, but also well as contribute to societal good.
Thank you. Okay, audience, this is your last time to send me a question. My last question I have is, I've heard several names of companies that have been thrown out that are doing some really great work in this sector. Is there a place where we can find those companies to be able to research them and find out what they're doing? Is there one association that's kind of an umbrella? Do I go to the Calgary Public Library and look at one of their databases? What advice do you have for those people on this call that want to research more about what's available?
Jeff, you're the best one to answer this.
I think the short answer is there's this little thing called the internet. I think you just go there and you spend some time searching around, recognizing your media literacy and and that the internet isn't all that everybody thinks it is sometimes. So don't believe everything you read. Have a good critical review as you're going through it. Make sure that if something is of interest, you validate it, you look at the evidence behind it, all that sort of thing, and reach out and talk about it, explore those sorts of things. The other thing would be to connect with some of the industry associations that are out there. The primary group for this sort of thing in Alberta is the Alberta Clean Tech Industry Alliance, ACTIA, ACTIA. They are a not-for-profit networking organization, membership-driven, that supports the whole articulation of the clean tech industry in Alberta. They were the first of its kind created in Canada, and then since then others have popped up in other provinces, and there's another national organization called the Canadian Clean Tech Industry Alliance. But there's Mars out of Ontario, Foresight, a group that I work with out of Vancouver and here in Calgary. They're all accelerators. So you can go to the Foresight CAC or Foresight Platform Calgary, and there are lists of the companies who are in there that are members of that company. Same for the Creative Destruction Lab and others like that. One out of Edmonton, if any of you are on the call from Edmonton, is Startup TNT. There's about 200 companies in there that go through that accelerator to. It's an investor-driven accelerator, so there's a number of companies that come out at the end of it that are then invested by those angels or venture capitalists, that sort of thing. But then go and look at the industry associations, PTAC and there's a lot of them, right? So go and look at those different industry associations, not the least of which, if you're in the industry or the energy space, you should know COSIA, the Canadian Oil Sands Innovation Alliance. So go and look at those different ones there to find out what kind of companies there are, where they're going, and what they're doing. And as we talked about off the top, I think that's if one of those becomes of interest to you, volunteer with them. Those companies are always looking for some kind of help and support. So if you can sort of pay it forward a little bit, contribute some of your expertise. It's amazing, as Sean said earlier, it's amazing what mirrors back to you when you make a contribution. So that volunteering, that paying it forward, that contributing expertise can be one of the best things, most practical things you can do to open your doors.
Yeah, if we're looking at kind of umbrella organizations for looking at employment opportunities, I would be remiss if I didn't do a little bit of plugging for the nuclear industry sections that do that. If you're looking for nuclear industry work or volunteer opportunities, there's the Canadian Nuclear Association, which is an industry-driven kind of umbrella organization that details all of the companies that are actually involved in nuclear industry work in Canada. And you might be surprised where some of them are located. There are a couple that are in BC and a couple that are in Alberta, and you would never really know if you didn't have this kind of system to look through them. But if you're looking for more kind of employment advocacy and people who might try and help you out to find a job in the nuclear industry, then you might want to look at North America Youth Generation in Nuclear, or NAYGN. They try and showcase people, here are all the potential jobs in the nuclear field. So you can chat with them and they might be able to help you out and find something if you're really interested in getting into that field. There's also Women in Nuclear, which is very ostensibly for helping women pursue careers in the nuclear field and advocating for them in professional advancement for that. So I highly recommend checking out all three of those if you're interested in the nuclear field, and you might find out a lot more information than you think is actually there.
Okay.
And the only one last organization I could maybe add is to go onto the website called resilientrecovery.ca. It's a website that actually identifies there's 2,200 companies that have signed on to support the idea of a post-COVID resilient recovery. And there's a resilient recovery task force. You can type that. It's a separate website, but they're linked. The people involved. The website looks something like this. There you go. Resilient recovery. That's and what. Oops. It's obviously wants to play music to me. But there's a lot of companies that have been identified there, and there's the Resilient Recovery Task Force talks about the kind of where they're recommending to the federal and provincial governments of where the money should be placed in order to drive towards a clean economy. And it's a lot about water, it's about home renovations, it's about a lot of things. And I think whether the government picks up the ideas, talks about hydrogen as well, I might add, but whether they pick up on a lot of the ideas and actually put money into it, we'll find out in the budgets that come down in the next little while. But I think those are tell you some of the more progressive companies and organizations that are trying to make things happen in this space.
Excellent.
And
Thank you.
sorry, Lynn, it's always dangerous when you start making lists because inevitably you're going to leave some lists. We're going shopping. But there's a couple more you might want to toss on there. There's CanMet. So all the CanMet Energy Labs, which are the government's research groups across the country, have some docs and postdocs and researchers, all kinds of things, doing some amazing work. So CanMet, CANET. The NRCan, Natural Resources Canada, has a function called Clean Growth Hub. And so companies can contact the Clean Growth Hub. They're more of a concierge service, I guess, that connects companies into the federal service, largely for funding. That's what most people are looking for, but not always. I don't actually know whether they work in reverse. So if you can reverse engineer them and phone them up and say, you know, I'm interested in connecting with some companies across Canada in the clean tech sector. Can you be a dating service and make some introductions and see if that will work? There might be possibilities there. Plus all the government entities, you know, IRAP, you know, Arvinder Kant here and Ron Quick in Calgary have, I don't know, there's like 10,000 companies in the IRAP family. Sustainable Development Technology Canada out of Ottawa, another big funder. Likewise for Alberta Innovates, and even Emissions Reduction Alberta, right? So all those government entities usually carry a database of companies of some sort that are growing, are fledgling, or are growth companies, always looking for support. So doing the Venn diagram of those opportunities with your interests and skills might be something to think about for those on the call. But there are many, many, many more than we have listed here. So go and do your research because we can't list them all in the time that we've got.
Excellent. Okay. Well, man, I've learned so much from you all today, and so I want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience. So over the last two sessions, then I understand there's hydrogen, there's SMRs, there's wind power, there's solar power, there's I guess the nuclear power, which is the other. Then you said about the agriculture. It's such a diverse field, and I'm not sure that the average Canadian even is aware of all of the opportunities or all of the solutions that we could actually have. And so I'm learning more, and I want to thank you for that. There will be a poll that will be popping up on the attendees screen. And on the poll, there is a question, and I believe we've given you the answer maybe one or two times throughout this session. If you want to click on the correct answer, put in your name, put in your email address, check your junk mail so that we can let you know if you were the lucky winner of the $50 gift card. So I want to, Jeff?
Can we play?
Jeff's going to, I see Jeff wants to enter. Last week was one of our, no. But I truly want to say thank you for, first of all, sharing your information in a way that was easy to understand. I'm a layperson. I know nothing. Science, I ended up taking science in grade 9, and then I had to go back and take it in grade 13 in Ontario because I didn't know it was a prerequisite for my university degree. And I almost failed it, but he took pity on me. So you've all done an excellent job in sharing where we're going with this. And so I truly do thank you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Chris, who is the talent pool. Hello, Chris. and
Good morning,
you
Lynn.
can say favorites.
Sounds good. Good morning. Thank you very much for everybody for taking part here in part 2 of our 6-week webinar series. We wanted to end this morning with a few thank yous. First of all, to the panelists, Dr. Lazell, Jeff, Sean, thank you guys for taking time out of your busy schedules to provide all of your insights to all of us on all of these subjects. As Lynn mentioned, great sort of insight and background, and great to put it together for people who maybe don't know enough about this and where all the great opportunities are. Greatly appreciated. For everybody in the audience, just so you know, I'm going to ask Dr. Lazell and Jeff and Sean for a lot of the links that they talked about today so that we can share them all with you guys online as well as you do your jobs. We also wanted to thank Lynn Berry, our moderator. Lynn, thank you once again. A great job of kind of bringing everybody together here and asking the questions on behalf of the audience and sort of keep everybody in line. That's greatly appreciated. To Dan, Brian, Christian, Kathy, and the rest of the team, the technical team at E3 and Together by Tribe. Thank you guys for making this look so good and have it go as seamlessly as possible. Greatly appreciated. To Brandon, Elia, Farah, and Ashley, who make these events work for the talent pool, thank you for all the great work that you guys do, and keep up the good work. We've got 4 more of these sessions coming up, so thank you again for everything that you do. To our event partners, Talent Needs for the Evolving Energy Ecosystem, Workforce Strategies International, and the Mature Worker Action Team Project, thank you for being involved, and thank you for letting people know about these events as they do come up. To our event sponsor, the Government of Alberta. Without their support, events like this could not take place. So thank you on behalf of the talent pool, but also thank you on behalf of the audience, because it's these types of events that get information out to people. And as Sean and Jeff and Dr. Lazell mentioned today, it's the energy and gets everybody moving and gets everybody thinking about great opportunities and where things could go. So thank you again to the Government of Alberta. And finally, a great big thank you to all of you for attending today. It's always appreciated that you attend these events. Thank you again for taking the time. I also wanted to encourage everybody to follow Talent Pool on social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. You'll see all of those links listed on the PowerPoints that will be coming up here at the end of the session. I also wanted to advise all of you about a webinar that we're holding with our partners at the Talent Needs for an Evolving Energy Ecosystem on October the 14th at 10 a.m. A registration link will be sent to all of you after the event today. And if you haven't attended a job seeker session with Pat and Cheryl in the past, we do encourage you to attend. Finally, a couple of other little housekeeping notes here. One, wanted to remind you all that we will see you all next Wednesday at 9 a.m. where we've got another great panel. We're going to be talking about other pieces of potential job search and potential opportunities within the Alberta environment. So we look forward to seeing all of you next Wednesday at 9 a.m. on October the 7th. And finally, just a reminder once again that the questions are now up on your screen. Remember, $50 gift certificate for the winner that gets picked with it from that side there. So feel free, go in there, sign up, and we look forward to hearing from you, all of you soon, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Have a great day. Bye now.